Welcome to the Right Room, where we explore the journeys that make us who we are and the voices that inspire us to rise. Today, we're joined by Lydia Knight, founder and CEO of the She Center, an organization dedicated to helping women reclaim their power by deprogramming from patriarchal, cultural, and personal limitations. Lydia's story is one of extraordinary resilience, raised in a cult, overcoming an eating disorder, surviving an abusive marriage, and building a life that's not only empowered, but also empowering for others. She's a millionaire entrepreneur whose work is in the top 2% of women-owned businesses globally, a best-selling author in the making, and a guide for those ready to rewrite their stories. In this episode, we dive deep into the neuroscience of healing, the framework for better leadership, and the journey of transforming trauma into triumph. Let's go. Hello, Lydia. Welcome to the Right Room. How are you?
So good. It's great to be in the right room.
I love Yes, it is. Right woman in the right room. I love it. I love it.
Thanks
How are
for
you
having
doing?
me on. Oh, I'm doing so well. I'm excited for our conversation. I'm thrilled about the work you're doing in the world. So it's fun that this brought us together.
I know, likewise. I feel like, and I say this, literally, my listeners hear this every single time. I'm like, we had a conversation in the room before we even hit record. And I love that because, like I was saying to you, I get to wake up and have these wonderful conversations with women that are just thriving and alive and following their passion and purpose. And it's so exciting. And so we are going to jump right in to your origin story of you were brought up in a cult. Is that
That is
right?
true.
Can you share how
Yeah.
that experience, a little bit about the experience and how it shaped your early view of the world and yourself?
Oh, absolutely. And just as a quick disclaimer, I hope you can feel in my energy. I'm happy, healthy, healed, well. Sometimes this
Yes.
story is a little intense. So I just want to
Okay.
say that it has a happy ending.
Okay.
So
And visual, and you
when I
look
was
great too. You look happy.
Oh,
You look
thank
healthy.
you.
Yeah, I mean, but you're saying people listening can, they hear in your voice the joy and the enthusiasm, but you also look it. So yes,
Well,
I want to
thank you.
relay
I
that
received
it's
that
both.
compliment as well.
Yeah.
So growing up, my grandmother was a cult leader, and she started a cult within the Mormon church. So I grew up Mormon, but then there was a cult that my grandmother created within that Mormon church. And the story that I believed growing up, I'll give you a quick example. When I was about 7 years old, I was just, chatting with my mom around bedtime, and my back kind of hurt. And as kids do, you go to your parents to find out why the world is the way that it is. I'm like, Mom, my back hurts. And the answer that my mom gave me, without skipping a beat, this was just the way life was. She's like, well, your back hurts because a group of Satan worshipers broke your spine over and over and over, put needles into your eyes, healed you with the power of Satan, but still made sure that you're in a lot of pain. And so that's why your back hurts.
You were how old?
I was around 7 at that point, but I've been hearing these stories since I can remember, since I was, 1 or 2. So I really always grew up with this absolute fear. So there was a phenomenon in the 80s called the satanic panic, which I think is really important to study because these cycles keep on repeating themselves. But a lot of Christian churches got into this idea that there are groups of Satan worshipers that rule the government, police, and they're kidnapping children and abusing them with a satanic ritualistic abuse. And that was the story of my life. We were always running from Satan worshipers. We would move in the middle of the school year without saying goodbye to friends. I was told about in detail all this awful abuse. I was told that I could be triggered at any time and hear some word from a stranger in the grocery store, and my brain would break into 1,000 different personalities, and I would be controlled by Satan. I was terrified, hiding and running every day of my life, all growing up. So that was the feeling and the experience of growing up within the cult. That was this cult created by my grandmother and very much fueled by my mother's stories. My mother was receiving this revelation from God, giving her all these details about this underground Satan worshiper group that we were running from. So that was normal for little Lydia.
I want to wrap my arms around you because I have a 7-year-old son, right? And I know, and that it's a lot to hear. And I can't imagine what it felt like as a 7-year-old, because we look up to our parents, right? They're our guides in life when we're little, and we believe them. And my gosh, how did you start to process this? How did you start to process the programming and deprogram from that? And what age were you? And what did that kind of transformation look like for you?
Yes, I believed this in this sort of echo chamber of my family, especially because it was supposed to be secret. I couldn't tell anyone, but my grandmother told all of these people. That was sort of how our cult grew, is she would tell them this story over and over and over while I was sitting next to her on the couch. So I would hear the details of my abuse, sometimes, I don't know, 50 times in a row, as she would tell people over and over. So it was very reinforced. And because I was told to keep it a secret, there was never any sort of someone questioning it or someone challenging it, or even someone being like, maybe this is abuse. That just never came up growing up. So, Hilary, I didn't start processing this till I was an adult. Like, I had a child of my own when I started realizing that this story wasn't true. Like, that was just my view of the world for most of my life. So the deprogramming process, it started with first finding out the truth, then being willing to challenge that truth and take action that aligned with that truth. And then third, what really saved my life was the neuroscience principles of how to deprogram, where even though I intellectually understood that this story wasn't true, I needed my body, my nervous system, my soul to understand that as well, because we're very much driven by how we feel viscerally, not what we intellectually know. So that's the broad strokes, but that was how the deprogramming started, and it saved my life.
I mean, what was your first kind of indication that life hadn't, that like...
Yes, as an adult, I got my degree in psychology. And so I started getting outside information like, oh, there's this thing that's false memories and these stories that are made up in society. And so there were a couple of little hints there. Then as an adult, looking at my mother's behavior now that I was grown up.
Yeah.
For instance, my mom always talked about how my dad had poisoned her, and my grandmother talked about how her husband had poisoned her. And then when I was 19 years old, my mother very suddenly, after not dating for 19 years, got married to this guy that she met like the week before. And a little while into the marriage, she's like, he's poisoning me. And it's things like that where I'm like, what are the chances that you date 100% poisoners? Like,
it's just the type of guy you attract. It's such a niche, it's a specific gentleman.
Yeah, it's your type.
Yes.
So there were little indicators like that. But the really big one was that I wanted to know my story as an adult. And I felt brave enough and I felt strong enough to understand my story. And I was always told there were boxes and boxes of evidence that were just outlining all the horrible abuse. And so I wanted to see them. Like, I wanted to see the evidence for myself, not because I doubted the story, but because I wanted to understand my past, not through someone else, but for myself. And I was forbidden to look at them. I asked, and that was shut down. And Hilary, I did the first sneaky thing in my whole life to that point. More sneakiness to come, but I went and I looked at the evidence, and there was nothing. There was nothing. And what I did find was this big, thick packet that was actually used in the 80s that was like written by Christian churches to train police officers on how to recognize Satan worship. And it was this big, thick packet, and I opened it up, and it's like, children are baptized in blood instead of water, and children have needles put into their eyes and their bones broken over and over. And as I flipped through this manual that wasn't about me, I realized that I had been told every single thing in that big, thick packet that I had been told that had happened to me. And I realized that this is not anything that ever happened to me. This is a story that was made up. And that was the real breaking point of me understanding this is not real.
It sounds like some of it was even guided though by like intuition, right? You're like, this feels a little off. Like when you're talking about your mom and when she wanted to get remarried, and like, is that accurate to say that some of it just kind of started to feel not right or off? Or, I mean, was there some intuition involved there that caused you to want to know more?
That's a great question. And I think it's really important to get in touch with and follow our intuition. And growing up Mormon, what I've been taught is that any sort of intuition that you feel, any feeling that doesn't align with the truth that you've been told, that you should shut down immediately. So when I found that packet, it was helpful and it fueled my intuition to see these clues in the past. But at the time when I was seeing those clues, I shut them down very quickly because that was literally religiously what I've been taught is what God wanted me to do, is anything that misaligns with what an authority has told you, you should shut that down immediately. So intuition wasn't a big part of it at that point. It was important later, and that evidence was important. But yeah, at that point, it was just shut it down.
And were you an only child?
No, I have a younger brother. So we both grew up in this circumstance. I'm the only one who's gotten out of the cult I grew up in. My brother, who is a middle-aged man now, is in a room in the basement of my grandmother's house. He's never had a job or a relationship, never gone to school. They deliver food to his door. He's completely cut off from the outside world. So I did grow up with a brother, but I haven't been in contact with him for a long time.
Lydia, this one's, that's what I said. I just want to and I want to hug you because we know so much about trauma and how it informs how we show up in the world and how we react to others. The body, you referenced this, and I do want to get into the neuroscience and how the body keeps the score, and it's stored in our fascia in those spaces of, even though our brain's telling us, no, this is a safe place, our body is still lighting up with, nope, this feels very similar to, something in the past.
Yeah.
You've talked to the neuroscience behind the deprogramming and the healing, but can you explain how understanding our brain's patterns can help us intentionally break cycles of pain?
Oh, absolutely. So the emotions that we feel and the actions that we take are all driven essentially by programming. So you can think of it like a pattern of thought or a habit of thought, but we receive this idea from somewhere, we internalize it, and then we have these looping patterns that really drive our behavior and our emotions. And when it comes down to it, we will almost 100% of the time follow what we viscerally feel from that programming rather than what we intellectually know. So this experience that so many of all of us have had in life of like, why did I do that? I know better. Why do I keep going back to this cycle? Like, I know what's good for me. We've all experienced that.
Yes. Is that subconscious? I mean, is this kind of the subconscious that you're referring to, or is that where the patterns are kind of live?
Yeah, so it's a misalignment. So essentially, once we adopt that programming and it becomes a habit of thought, it's run by our lower brain, which is in charge of habits. It's our autopilot, and it's a nonverbal part of our brain. So it drives our behavior, but we don't interact with that part of our brain in a way that feels like a conversation. It feels like an instinct or an urge or a drive. And so what the key is to bring that programming from the lower part of our brain to the higher part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. It's the part of our brain that feels like us, that we can have a conversation with of like, I wonder what they meant by that when they said that, or, I would like my life to be better. These are the steps I'm going to take. The higher prefrontal cortex part of our brain is the one that can make changes. So when we move those habitual patterns to our higher brain, our prefrontal cortex, we're seeing them with a new part of our brain and the part of our brain that can create alignment and essentially doubt what we've been told. And doubt is an incredibly important tool. So that's the neuroscience path of how we change our relationship to that programming, where at first it's driving our behavior, but then it goes to a place where we are in charge. Like, we have an option. Like, yeah, I'm going to do what serves me best.
So many questions. So I imagine, right? So because I read, Bruce Perry, What Happened to You. Are you familiar with this book where he talks about that from the lower brainstem, it flattens time. And so when you're kind of take back to that place of trauma, and if you can't get out of that, I mean, it's not my neck, but that brainstem place, you just continuously repeat the patterns, which is what you're saying. You come from that place of trauma. You don't know any different, right? So how can a person, I just imagine, be like pulling up the brainstem to the prefrontal cortex? I mean, how does that work look? What does that look like? How does someone start to even come out of the brainstem to the place where they can start making better decisions?
Yeah. This changes everything to know how to do this. So this is exactly what we've taught over 9,000 clients that we've worked with now. We call it the 5 C's, and it's all created from what actually works. There are lots of things in theory, right? Of like, this is what should work. But what I love about the experience that we get to have in our community is those 5 C's were created from what actually works, what's most effective, and what yields the results that we're really looking for. Instead of this should work, it's like, no, I'm teaching you this because over thousands of trials, like this is what actually works. So I'll give you an example of one piece of the 5 C's process. Is there are these fun neuro hacks that we can do, and they're all, they're safe and they're effective and they're really fun actually. And the lower part of our brain is nonverbal and the higher part of our brain is verbal. So for instance, we've all been in a place where we're trying to sort through thoughts in our brain. Maybe we had some conflict at work and our brain is just looping it over and over and over. And we don't want to keep thinking about it, but we're up in the middle of the night and we're still rehearsing this thing that happened at work earlier. And when things are still looping in our brain, it's very hard to sort them. It's very hard to move past them because they're still in that like nonverbal place. So just a fun little neuro hack that everyone can start practicing today is when you realize you're having a thought that doesn't serve you, you say it out loud. And it wakes up your prefrontal cortex because it's the part of your brain that is in charge of speech. And all of a sudden, you're going from inside your brain, I'm not good enough. Why can't I improve? Like no one's going to like me. Like I shouldn't say something. And you're driving in your car and out loud, you're like, I'm not good enough. Nobody likes me. And then all of a sudden, your prefrontal cortex starts talking back. Like, what do you mean you're not good enough? Like, think of all the things that you do in the world that make you proud to be alive. What do you mean you shouldn't say that thing at work? Like that would actually help everyone. You get in touch with your wisdom because now you're sorting through these thoughts and ideas and programming with a part of your brain that can give you wisdom back instead of just loop it over and over and over. So it's things like that, like understanding these really quick, accessible ways to start having a new relationship with your brain.
That is such a powerful tool. I mean, that little tip. Thank you for that, because I noticed when I start looping, for me, it's an indication, because I'm pretty self-aware after a while, that I'm like, okay, I need to reach out to somebody. I need to reach out to community. I need to be around people. Because for me, it starts to indicate like I could be going into a depressive or isolated mode, because I start looping, and I don't know where does that come from? Like, what is the purpose of the looping? Is it a safety thing or?
Oh, this is a fun thing to nerd out on. I'll be brief, but like, this is a fun thing to nerd out.
I could stay here all day with this topic of like.
Yes. So the lower part of our brains is that sort of primal part of our brain. It's safety. So you're totally on track. It is a safety thing. And because it's that survival part of our brain, it's always going to choose what feels safe over what might benefit us more. So it wants to keep us in those same cycles. So for instance, if we're looping and we're feeling anxiety about it, and we've practiced anxiety, that part of our brain will identify anxiety with safety because, well, you've been anxious for the last 10 years and look, we've still survived. So let's keep being anxious. So our brains will literally keep on perpetuating that and keep on cycling it because it feels safe even to be miserable if we're familiar with being miserable.
So I heard this, and we're going to lead into this with you as well, but I've heard that is why people, you look at, I'm just going to say women, even though it goes both ways, women in abusive relationships or toxic relationships, and they're like, why don't you just leave? And it's because for so long they're put down or told they're a certain way or physically abused to the point where their brain can't get out of that space to cognitively think, this is no longer okay, I need to leave. Would that be, and part of your story is overcoming, you left an abusive marriage and overcame disordered eating.
Yes.
And how do those, is that accurate? Is that kind of why women, again, I'm just sticking with women, can you talk to that a little bit more, why it's so hard for women to see that or leave, maybe when people are saying this is, I'm worried for you or I'm concerned.
Yeah. And that's a great thing to bring up. There are lots of different factors, and I want to acknowledge there are lots of different factors. Mm-hmm. We live in a world where it's it's hard to break away from an abuser, especially as a woman. It's hard financially and it's hard socially. And so I don't want to minimize all of those factors because
Of
those are really
course.
important. And
Thank you for
part of
pointing that out.
it,
Yeah.
oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's just, it's great to acknowledge that. And you're right on track with a lot of times it's the programming that we've been given, and being in an abusive relationship, having gotten out of that, I know just how that feels, where even though intellectually, you're not powerless because you've been made to feel powerless, there's this programming in your mind of you'll never be okay on your own. So it would be safer. It'd be better to stay even though you're miserable than to be alone and failing. And so it's that kind of programming that's perpetuated, and abusers are just so skilled at like planting that programming in our minds, right? Because it benefits them, and reinforcing it and keeping us isolated from other ideas that would challenge that. So one piece of that for sure is that there's a programming that's being perpetuated that keeps us in it's the devil that we know situation. It's, well, even though this is not okay, I'm going to stay because it's familiar. And that lower part of our brain really drives that of like, yeah, do that because at least we know what's going to be happening.
And there's this is not meant to minimize it, but kind of put it succinctly. It's like we'd rather stay in controlled chaos and an unknown calm because we're familiar with that, or stay in a chaos versus, go to something that's calm because it's unknown. And that sometimes feels scary if all we know is the chaos, or if all people know is the chaos. And how have these experiences from the cult to disoriented eating to leaving an abusive marriage, how have they influenced the principles that you teach at the She Center? And let's talk about the She Center. We haven't talked about that. Talk about the She Center.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so the She Center, we've coached over 9,000 clients. We do leadership training for the U.S. Army. We've trained leaders at Adobe and Disney and National Geographic, over 9,000 people, like really celebrate all of the lives in the community that are the She Center. And our mission is that we believe that every problem that the world faces is because of the missing influence of women. And so we are here to restore the influence, the leadership, the decision-making, the voices of women, just simply, for lots of different reasons, but simply because it's one of the most effective ways to make the world a better place for everyone is to focus on uplifting women. So that's what we do at the She Center. This started with my own story of, deprogramming from a cult. And it really came to life when I developed as an adult just an awful life-threatening eating disorder where it started out as starving myself, and then I started binge eating, and then I started trying to make up for that binge somehow, and my whole life became this back and forth. And it was really at that point, Hilary, where I thought that deprogramming from the cult was like I'm so glad I found out about these principles, and now I'll move on with my life and probably never interact with those principles again. They were just for like that one isolated thing. But then
they come back
once
around.
Once I had tried everything over years to end my eating disorder, I had this thought of, well, if nothing that I've tried works and it's all making it worse, I wonder what would happen if I started treating my eating disorder like programming. It's diet culture programming instead of cult programming. And in 1 week, I was completely free from my eating disorder. Free from the urges to binge, free from the pull toward restriction, free from the hamster wheel of thoughts and my brain around it, like free, like I didn't have an eating disorder anymore. And we've helped over 1,000 people now end their eating disorder. Some of them 55 years of bulimia, like they've done everything, and now they don't have an eating disorder anymore. So how this really came up is realizing the power of these neuroscience principles and how they don't just apply to getting out of a cult. They apply to all sorts of things, including eating disorders and ending them, and including all the sorts of teachings that we talk about in executive coaching. So yeah, they're very applicable because our whole life is through our brain.
Yeah. And I was reading, it's like we're aware of 40 inputs or something per minute or something, but we really are bombarded with the numbers 11,000 per second or something, and something really wild, and a really big number of that. Just we have constant input all the time, right? And so does that input, is that part of the programming that we start to absorb from like culture and our education and family systems? And is that accurate?
100%. So some of the big areas when we really get to the core of what programming needs to change for us to break through that and really live the lives that we want. The themes of programming are often oppressive upbringings. It's been, the way that we were raised, past relationships. If you've ever been in a relationship and you start treating that person like your past relationship and it's not them, but like you're in that same cycle and you're like, why is this happening? Like that programming carries through. Diet culture is a really big one. And the main one that we see that is holding women down and is so powerful to deprogram is patriarchy. The system that we live in, because it's the water that we swim in all the time. These messages of I have to remove all the hair from my body, or my eyelashes have to look this certain way, or I don't want anyone to feel bad, or I need to keep my voice small, to challenge where those things come from. And it's benefiting someone and it's not us. And that is really powerful to deprogram from.
I have so many thoughts here. I've started reading more about the historical, where this came from, basically, right? And it started back in 200 AD. Some of this programming, putting women down and putting them in boxes and, and not allowing them in leadership positions. And it's staggering, right? And I'm reading and I'm getting enraged, not because I'm like, but because I'm enraged and I'm sad because women have been oppressed and it's not, and I'm like, we are better. It's like, we just want a chance to be, I don't know. I have so much I have been reading a lot on this. And I said to my partner the other day, I'm like, I regret not double majoring in gender studies and psychology in college. I was in my active addiction, like would not have been possible for me. But I'm like, if I knew then what I know now,
Yeah, for sure. It's a fascinating history. It's a very intentional oppressing of women. It's fascinating, it's enraging, and it's really important to look at. And I was thinking the other day, like, if I was an alien and I came and just looked at Earth without any sort of context, I would
love this.
I would look at society and be like, this world used to be led by women.
Talk more to that. Why do you say that? Yeah.
Yes, there are and not in like a women are better, just like there are so many indications that society used to be, and historically it's really interesting to look at as well, but led by women, because you don't put all your guards on your least threatening captive. Like, there are so many systemic things that keep women down.
Say that again.
You look at So what did I say? It's a systemic thing. So to say it another way, because
put all of the strongest.
Oh yeah, like you don't put all of your strongest guards to guard your least threatening captive.
Yes.
You put all of the systems to guard and oppress the thing that is most threatening, that is most powerful. And if you look at the clues of what our society does in so many different areas, in very specific ways, to keep women's voices down and their power and their leadership down, you're like, if you were just coming in without any sort of history as an alien, you'd be like, looks like women are the powerful ones, because there just isn't that oppression. And there are lots of oppressed groups, and I don't mean to minimize that. Yes. But when you really look and study how women are oppressed, it's like, you must be really powerful.
And it's kind of, and then just touching this, like, women can never win. And what I mean by that, not that, I was just talking, it's like, if you have children and decide you want to work, you're selfish. If you decide you want to work and not have children, you're selfish. If you decide that you want to have a nanny and work part-time, you're selfish. Like, no matter what, like in any of those scenarios, you're selfish. You have kids, you're selfish. You want to work, you're selfish. You don't have kids, you're selfish. It's like the same messaging can't be true for all those scenarios. And it's just like, I think you're spot on. And I think, do you think women, well, I'm not going to go down that path. I said that there's also like, there's women too, like ones that are willing to look at their shadow side, right? Or look at the programming or look at those things and be willing to be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. Because those things are hard. Like I have my addiction. When I had to look at that was really hard. And so I imagine, and based on what you said too, when you had to start looking at the deprogramming of the cult, like that sounds really hard. Right. And so I think we're either willing to look at the hard, like choose your hard. You can start looking at our stuff because it's hard, or you can ignore it and it starts to come out in other ways, right? Which is also hard. And I think there are two, people choose one of those paths. And in my opinion, the people that choose to look at the hard by way of the programming and the addiction and, painful divorce or losing a parent, looking at the things that impact them, that they're less likely to maybe judge someone else's experience because they know how hard it is to, to walk the path of sometimes being a human feels really hard.
Yeah. Like it's hard every day for so many different reasons. And I think a really encouraging thing to remember, I love what you said about pick your hard. We talk about that in our community all the time as well, because both ways there's going to be a hard. That if you're picking your hard and staying in the familiar suffering that you know, it's only going to get worse. And if you pick your hard and choose to have a change in your life, then it's only going to get better. And so that can be a motivating piece, but it's important that you understand your brain will always, that lower brain will always vote for stay with the suffering and the chaos and the patterns that you know now. So it's always going to feel a little bit easier to stay.
Yeah.
So there's a courage piece of this that's really important. And I believe that every single person has that courage to make changes. It's a decision, but I believe that everyone is empowered to do it.
That's so true, because I said that when I got sober. I was like, I could either, and eventually I just got tired of just ignoring all of the stuff that was burning, metaphorically burning around me. I either had the choice to get sober, which felt really scary and alone, or I could continue to just bury my head in shame and pretend like it didn't exist. And eventually everything burned around me. I was like, I need to make a choice. And it felt scary, but you're right. I love the way you put it, is so articulate and beautiful. The change feels hard and scary, but it only gets better. Where if we continue to stay in that other space, it doesn't.
Yeah. That's the
So
thing
well
about
said.
a familiar path. It's like, well, you know where that leads.
Right. Like Groundhog's Day, when there's insanity, when they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Yep.
This time it's going to be different. One of the things that you said our greatest contribution can become our most meaningful, our greatest challenge, can become our most meaningful contribution. Can you talk to that and share a little bit about how that shows up with your work in the She Center?
Yes, it has been so beautiful to see. I mean, literally thousands of times over the years as we've worked with clients, that the most challenging, the most difficult part of your story becomes the most triumphant part of your story when you're on the other side of it, when you're empowered. And what ends up happening is the things that we learn, and I want to be really clear, it doesn't mean that the bad things that have happened to us or the ways that we've been hurt or our struggles, were justified or okay or excused at all. And there is absolute gold in what we learn on the free, peaceful, empowered side of that from those challenges. And even just looking at my own life, like my eating disorder, being raised in a cult, these are some of the most challenging things I've overcome. And it was through the process of overcoming them that I got to learn who I am, and I got to build the principles that have helped thousands of others. And I think it's a really important thing to remind ourselves, especially when we're in that really dark spot of our story, that this is going to be the best part of the story. This is going to be the most triumphant part of the story, because who I get to choose to be, how I show up in this, is going to be incredibly valuable on the other side. So that's a really useful frame of how to look at the hard times we're going through and how to make peace with and really get the most value out of the hard chapters as well.
I love that. What I heard kind of is like the power of choice, right? Like you make the choice to change, and that's really empowering versus kind of staying stuck in the space of not change.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your upcoming memoir.
Yes. Oh, it's been so fun. Okay, so I'll share a little background. Yeah. So we've been teaching 9,000 clients over 14 years, and it's been so beautiful to see the results of people practicing these principles. But Hilary, I never told anyone where the principles came from. I thought that me finding these out from escaping a cult was just too bizarre, not very relatable. I'm like, nobody wants to hear about that. But then I've had this intuition, like, that I should, like, the story should be shared in some way. And so the story is written. So it's a double memoir. It's the story of me growing up in a cult and escaping that cult. And then the other part of that memoir is my dad's story and how he searched for his kids for 25 years, and his beautiful, beautiful story. And that was written like years ago, and it's just not been published because I'm like, I wonder when the right time for this is. So literally just a couple of months ago, I'm like, okay, I feel like these stories should be told, but like nobody wants to hear them. So I'll make like a secret TikTok account and I'll just tell these stories and nobody will care. And then I'll just
Anonymously.
have gotten to tell them. And there's like a viral video every week. Like it's wild. Like these stories are just blowing up. And
People
so
want
many
to
people have
know.
asked, like, where's the book? And I'm like, well, actually, it's written already. I should probably publish it. So yes, the memoir is coming out. It's called Split. It's this beautiful story, my story and my dad's story, and it's going to be out there in the world. And it
How does
has
that
been
feel?
so wonderful. It feels so good. Like I had no idea what a joy it would be to share these stories and how many other people have been impacted. I mean, the satanic panic of the 80s impacted so many people. So it's just another lesson of share your story, follow your intuition, even if that lower brain is like, nobody wants to hear this.
Yes. Do you feel lighter having shared some of that, like your story, or is that not true?
Yeah.
I meaning,
No, I absolutely do. Like I feel all different about this. And I didn't really expect to. Like I've done the healing work. It's something
yeah,
that I can talk about and joke about. Like I'm not re-traumatized by it because I've really worked through. I've used the same principles that I teach and they work. And so I've worked through that and I didn't expect much to come from telling the story. But there's been this beautiful next layer of sharing
hmm
authentically and how it's really brought out other people's authentic stories because of my authentic sharing and this beautiful connection. It's been such an absolute joy. It's really good.
that's right. And I only asked that because of I had kept my story of recovery, and I was sober for 15 years before I shared with anybody other than like super close friends and family, like a handful of people knew. And I thought I was living a free, authentic life. And I was like, well, that's just a part of my life I don't talk about. Right. But
Yeah.
once I shared it, I didn't realize just how free I felt. And I didn't think I felt trapped before. And that's when I asked you that. Like, it's almost like an unexpected lightening of a backpack or something, some metaphor where I felt just more free. And I was like, okay, it just is. This is just part of my story.
Can you imagine a world where every woman feels open and safe to share her authentic story?
Mm-hmm.
That would change everything. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for being an example of that because it changes things for us and it changes things for the world. I think of things like motherhood, where there's so much patriarchal pressure to be like, the most joyous thing in the world is holding my babies and I don't want to do anything else. It's like
I need
if
to
you
get my
feel
body
that way,
back.
like yeah,
Or
exactly.
like, go back to work.
What if we were just all really honest, even about just something like motherhood? Of like, sometimes this is hard. Sometimes I don't want to do this. Like, yeah, the pretending is the thing we do if we're not sharing authentically.
And so yes. And it's okay. And like I was listening to something and it was talking about shame. Like there's shame, right? It's like, oh, I feel bad about this. But then there's like the like self-fulfilling shame. I'm not saying it right, but like then we keep ourselves locked in it. It's like because we think, oh, someone else thinks this way, this way, and this way, and this way, and that person's gonna. And we keep ourselves locked in this jail of something that might not even be true, but it's like self-perpetuating. It's just fear, right? But I love
Yeah.
that giving and yeah, I mean, just giving people the space to be them. And that's my partner and I talk about this all the time. Like, nothing bothers me, meaning however anybody wants to live their life is 100, as long as they're not endangering myself, my family, my child, I mean,
Yeah.
but if people, it doesn't affect me. So why does it matter? If it makes somebody happy and that's how they choose to live their life, why does it matter? And I feel like so many people have an opinion because they don't understand it or they're interested in it and they can't talk about, I mean, there's so many things when if we just allow people the space to just be them, just think of how much less, I don't know, anger. Maybe that sounds very rose-colored glasses, but
Absolutely. And no, I believe as well, like that would make the whole world better, but our current oppressive systems would collapse if everyone was just like, I'm not going to yuck your yum. Like, I'm just going to be me, you be you. Yeah, it would be an amazing world, but it wouldn't be good for our current oppressive systems. And I think that's one reason why
really,
there's a lot of reinforcement around it. A quick little fun, nerdy thing, because I love how you brought up the concept of shame. And I want to
yes.
connect it to what we talked about before, neuroscience wise, because
Mhm.
an aspect of shame is I'm never going to say it out loud and I'm going to keep it a secret because I feel shameful.
Mhm.
But always that feeling of shame stays in that lower part of our brain. And the moment that we speak authentically about the thing that we feel shame about is when we wake up our prefrontal cortex and we see our shame in a whole new way.
Oh my gosh, I just had the most, yes, this is clearly, I know you're right and this is true, but like if my partner, he's like, I know this sounds crazy, but whatever. I got jealous because the person at the checkout counter said hi to you. I mean, or something silly, and he's like,
Yeah.
it sounds so much sillier when I say it out loud because I didn't, or same thing, vice versa. And we're like, that sounds crazy, but we have that safe space where we can just say anything. But you're right. Once you say it, it doesn't feel as, it's like, oh, wait a second. That's silly.
Yes, you can like literally feel how that shame changes once you say it out loud. And
Yes.
now that's the neuroscience principle behind it.
It just clicked in my brain that I'm like, oh, wait a second. I have a real life example of that, how that's, or just saying it out loud because you think like, I'm not good enough. This will never work or whatever. And then you have a safe space, whether a coach, a therapist, a partner, a friend or something, and you say it out loud and you're like, actually, I don't know that I believe that anymore. So just literally putting words to it changes. My gosh, you just changed my day, week. And so many other women that are listening to this that you just changed. That's incredible. Thank you so much for that.
It's so fun to just see how understanding these principles, it really does change everything.
And it's the little things, right? It's amazing. We are like coming. I have so many more questions to ask you because this has been so incredible. I do want to talk quickly. You shared that your best friend's recent passing. You had a friend pass from an overdose, and it's raw and fresh. And how has this loss impacted your view on the work that you do and kind of the urgency towards healing, helping
Yeah.
people heal?
Thank you for asking. So remember how I didn't tell my cult story for a long time, like my whole life
Mm.
until 2 months ago?
Yeah.
So the only other person that I knew that had grown up in a cult was my best friend. Like when she passed, I just looked at the world in a different way. Like, why would I wait? Like, one, I felt lonely for like my cult kid friend, like that was something that we could like
Yeah.
joke about, like having cult leader moms. And
It's a small club, I imagine.
it's a
Local.
small
It's
club.
a
And I'm
small
like,
club.
now there's no one in the world. And now I've like found more people that have had a similar upbringing or like identify with that. But it was interesting when she died and, moving through that grief. It's like, I've had this story sitting on the shelf for years. I've never told this out loud. And now I'm lonely in it because I literally don't have someone else that understands. And you just, when someone dies, especially when it's, at their own hand or at their own choice, there's all of this, what could have been. Like, she would have loved getting old. Like, she was such an incredible feminist, and she shaved her head because she was like, oh, I don't have to like do this performance of having long hair. Like, she was that kind of person. And I think she would have loved aging and embracing it. And it's those sort of lost stories that she won't get to live. And what it brought up for me is like, all right, I'm going to tell my story. Like, I'm not going to let these stories die with me. So that was actually the thing that happened, why a big motivation of why I decided to finally share the story. And so it's impacted the work in a big way because it's this next level of authenticity that I didn't know I really needed.
I'm so sorry for your loss. It sounds
Thank
like
you.
it's impacted in a lot of ways, right? And grief is one of those things that you can't put a word on, meaning
Yeah.
like one descriptor. It's sadness, it's loneliness, it's anger, it's longing, it's all of those things wrapped up into that one word of grief. And so I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
If you had one word of advice or one insight, piece of encouragement, let's do 1 to 3. One might be hard. Like,
I know I'm thinking
that's
of
a
more than
lot to
one.
ask. Yeah, I was like, one is a lot to ask someone. What's one thing? What are 3 pieces of advice or encouragement? Or, if there's a woman listening that's, maybe scared to tell her story or being held in shame or, stuck in that lower brainstem of I'm not good enough. What is something that you would tell that woman or 3
Yeah.
things that you would tell that woman?
Thanks for expanding that.
3 to 5. I mean, we could go.
Yeah,
I
well,
know one was
5 to
one was
10.
exactly. Get out your notebooks, ladies. We've got a list
We've got
coming.
the list, the BuzzFeed top list of Lydia Knight's advice.
Oh, I love that.
Okay. I know, maybe we should do that. So I would say that the action that you take is going to get you a lot further than trying to get ready to take that action.
Ooh.
Do it before you feel ready. Do it before you feel worthy. Understand that there's nothing in the way except your own decision to take action. That's what's going to make it feel better, what you've done, not what you've prepared even better for or gotten perfect. I would also say that you are worthy of what you want. Your desires are there for a reason. Your money is for you to invest in yourself. Your time is to do things that you love. Your body is for your own pleasure and joy and life experience. You're worthy of all of that, and it's not anyone else's. What a gift if you want to share, that's optional. But you are yours, and what you've created is yours. I would also say, don't wait. If you feel inspired, like as you're listening to this or watching this right now, I want you to get in touch with your intuition and think, what do you feel inspired to do? Is there a program that you've wanted to do that you're just like, oh, well, there's going to be a better time? Is there an activity that you've wanted to do? You're like, well, once everyone's taken care of, then if there's time left over for me, then I'll do it. Decide to take action toward that, even if it's a 2-minute action, even if it's one Google search, even if it's, $100 down on something. Like, take action in the next hour. Like, don't go to bed tonight until you have taken action toward that thing. And that's 3, I think.
That is 3, and I want 10. No, I'm kidding, because those are good, right? And your last one, we had Dr. Sam Duflo in here, and she's like, where are the sparkles? She's like, why are we saving them for, and it kind of goes along with that thing. She's like, I wear red lipstick at home because it makes me feel like, just do it. Like, we're like, I shouldn't do this, or I shouldn't wear sparkles on a Tuesday morning, or I shouldn't wear red lipstick while I'm working. Why not do it? Take action on what you're called towards. And wow, Lydia, this has touched me in so many ways. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. And where can people find out more about you, about the work you do, about your book and your memoir? Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the best place to land is our website, theshecenter.org/podcast. And there is a link to the books coming out. We also have another book called Thought Leader that talks about the 5 C's that we mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And we have an incredible upcoming live event called Deprogram. It's a 3-day immersive transformation experience where you learn the 5 C's and you actually deprogram from one piece that has been holding you back, like that one thing that keeps on sticking.
Yes.
Like, we're going to just get it done. It's going to be so fun.
It's virtual?
No,
Is it virtual?
It's in person.
Oh, it's in person.
It's here in Santa Fe. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, oh, anybody can join anywhere. Okay, so people can come to Santa Fe and take that. That sounds...
Yes. And we have online programs as well, so you'll be able to find all that there. But that would be a great place to land for the upcoming books, for the event, for our online community. We have a free Discord community you can be part of. Lots of great things. But if you land on theshecenter.org/podcast, that'll get you everything you need, at least on our website.
And we'll put that in the show notes too below. Lydia, this has been such a joy, such an honor, so touching. Thank you for your candidness and honesty and just real authenticity. It's such a joy and delight to speak with you today. So thank you so much for bringing that.
Yeah, thank you. I love just getting to share in that authenticity. You're an amazing host. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. You're very sweet. We'll see you soon.